So, one thing I want to accomplish by creating more videos is kind of holding myself accountable to myself. And this is going to be, the first of many videos. And I've tried to start YouTube videos before, but I always felt kind of silly or was nervous about expressing myself or just talking to a screen because there's no one else here except for myself. But at the same time, I feel like there's a lot of things that I've been talking with people that they find really relatable, and people have questions or concerns or ideas, and a lot of that I've noticed can get validated and bring people a lot of peace and comfort, which heals my consciousness the way that I need it to when I'm resonating with people like that. So I figured I'd start making more videos and see what happens, see where it goes. The big thing I want to focus on leading into the end of this month of May, it's May 17th, 2025, is I would really like to be more health conscious. And I've always been very health conscious, but in the sense of being more disciplined. And the thing that I've found frustrating in my mental health ever since I was in high school was my self-image. And I think instead of prescribing lots of pharmaceuticals and therapy, it's much more beneficial for people to invest in resistance training and athletics and going out and grounding themselves in nature and all this holistic stuff that I feel like kind of gets this bad association or rep in contemporary society, but in lieu of everything that's kind of been going on politically, sociologically, anthropologically, I think people are starting to really question what the norm is and how they perceive right and wrong and what really is beneficial and non-beneficial and how much evidence there really is to support certain things, and when there's a lack they actually begin to question it now. And this is kind of a really interesting time of new beginnings and new ideas to kind of come through and be expressed. So I want this to be kind of like a new me, like the journey of my new identity. And a few months ago, in February, I finally got a tattoo apprenticeship. And before that, I was in residential remodeling. Before that, I was going to school for video game design. And I always loved art. I always loved being creative. I came from a bit of a hostile home. My parents were always arguing. There was a lot of heavy critical response from their end a lot of times. I always felt this sense of inadequacy or lots of anxiety, confusion with my identity and whatnot. And I feel like a lot of that was generated from being in an environment where I didn't feel like I could just kind of live. I felt like I needed to survive. And I remember being at a point when I was a little kid, almost like someone flipped a switch, where I was really excited to go play and imagine and use my creative thinking and have fun. And you could pick up a stick, and that stick could be the coolest looking sword you ever freaking imagined. And then all of a sudden something kind of changed at one point, and I think it was the combination of like complex traumas and things like that. But I really want people to understand that I get it. I've struggled with depression and anxiety and a lot of almost debilitating psychological problems, to the point where I've attempted things and stuff like that. But if I were to go visit myself or talk to myself from 15 years ago or back in high school, I don't think I'd ever believe that I would be where I'm at now. And it really is possible to shift all of it. And with the contemporary sciences that are coming out in neurology, physics, quantum mechanics, we're seeing all of this evidence that points to a spiritual umbrella. And I feel like spirituality for me has always been something that's just uncategorized by our perception of science as contemporary peoples. And for the longest time, there's been this theme of separating church and state. And I understand the religious component, but I think what's also happened is people have tied the religious and the spiritual component together, and they don't realize that, yes, there's a functionality and a relationship between the two, but at the same time, they are their two separate, independent entities. But the way that I like to think about religion is it's like the train tracks that the spirit train rides on. And there's a lot of people out there that would, or have, debated me on the importance of religion and its necessity, which I think it is important, and there is a necessity for it, regardless of the repercussions that it leads to. I think if there's no religion whatsoever, there's a severe degradation of the transcendentalistic ideology in duality that we experience as human beings. And basically what I mean by that is if you don't have some kind of conduit for ideas to be expressed and expound upon, those ideas are then lost and, fall wayside to the ether, until someone essentially rediscovers that they do exist, which is possible. But at the same time, I think because of the stuff that we know when it comes to social behavior, influence, peer pressure, and psychology, there's I know for me at least, a desire to want to get people further along faster. And I feel like everyone has their own spiritual journey, and they're going to get to wherever it is they're going. But whether it's this lifetime or the next lifetime or the next one, which is kind of ironic to me because I'll have a conversation with an atheist, and, they'll have more faith that there isn't something more out there than I do, knowing that science is proving that there is more out there, regardless of what we call it. And at the end of the day, even though they might feel that way in this lifetime, I know in the next lifetime or the lifetime after that, all of a sudden their consciousness will start to expand and they'll get it, they'll understand, and they'll start that further progression down that spiritual journey. Which at the end of the day, I think is for us to rejoin source energy or source consciousness. And we as beings are comprised of your flesh or your body, your mind, which generates the ego or your perception of what you think to be yourself, and your consciousness, which is the true enlightened awareness of what then becomes the ego in the body. And that consciousness allows you to observe the experiences in reality as for what people would probably call the 3D, in such a unique way that allows consciousness to then grow. Even though it's not really growing, I don't think it's really growing or shrinking, because those are conceptual elements that are found within the 3D. And when we start talking about things that are outside of the 3D, or what people like to refer to as the 5D, or et cetera, things that are outside of what we perceive to be reality, with our five senses, that's when they're really, like, terms like big and small, or growing and shrinking, or positive and negative, they kind of fall to the wayside. They become moot in their relevance, because those are concepts that we derive meaning from in how their value is perceived. You know, whether something is small and it's valuable, or big and it's valuable, or positive and it's valuable, or negative and it's valuable. And I really do think that you can take your circumstances and change them with your thoughts. And I know a lot of people will, you know, disagree in the sense of, you know, people's circumstances can be so extreme, and I've had my fair share of circumstances. I've experienced really terrible things, especially in my childhood, not just from my parents, but because of other circumstances. And I started to identify with those circumstances, and then they began to resonate in my reality, and things were brought to me that I was resonating at. And in a world where pretty much everything's comprised of waves and particles, or light and sound, when we talk about vibrations, there's actually a really interesting experiment I watched the other day. It's called the ping pong ball experiment. And there's a tuning fork that's resonating at, you know, certain hertz. And the ping pong ball is drawn to it. And the person conducting the experiment introduces another tuning fork, which is at a totally different resonating frequency. And nothing happens to the ping pong ball. But then he changes that tune fork to the same tune fork that the ping pong ball is already resonating at. And something really interesting happens, and it actually generates energy between the two of them. So the ping pong ball starts to get drawn into the middle. So what this experiment tells us is that things will, if brought to the same frequency, align and resonate towards you. So if you are, like, I was watching all these manifestation videos, and I just was like, yeah, this is a bunch of horse crap. I don't believe any of this. And now that I've been trying to, I shouldn't say now. At the time, I was trying to convince myself that it was a real thing, and almost do what I would call reverse brainwashing, because as kids, we're so influenced by institutions and society and stuff to stop critical thinking, to stop imagining, to stop recognizing that we are a consciousness before anything else. It brainwashes us into being dull, deluded zombies that react off of things instead of, you know, have a higher awareness. And you can do the same shit. I had a friend of mine tell me, yeah, the brainwashing worked to get you there. You can use the same kind of brainwashing to unbrainwash yourself. Which at first I kind of questioned, because it seemed really silly. And all of a sudden I was like, yeah, okay, like that makes sense. That would be the most simple thing. So I started doing that. And I had a miserable job. I was a miserable person. I had miserable relationships. And when I began to really try to occupy the state of being, the thing that I wanted to have emotionally, that's when stuff started changing in my reality. And I started doing simple stuff. So I've always wanted to be a tattoo artist. I've had friends since high school tell me, dude, you should get a tattooing. You're such a great illustrator. And I was always so hard on myself. I didn't think that I was going to be good enough. I always made up these self-limiting beliefs when thinking about putting something permanent on someone. I was like, oh no, what if something goes wrong? What if someone gets upset? You know, I just was not in a very high vibrational mindset. And as I began to alter little things, like on my Facebook, I started using Facebook again because I really wanted changes to happen. I was sick of my old identity and not having money and just being miserable. You know, I put aspiring tattoo artist. You know, it was enough for me to say I want to become a tattoo artist. I'm not a tattoo artist, but I'm aspiring to become one. And making those tiny little adjustments helped condition my ego to kind of loosen its grip a little bit enough. And I did that with a whole bunch of stuff. Like, I am aspiring to get more money, or I'm aspiring to do this, I'm aspiring to get that. But it'll get to a point where you, even though you may not have the thing that you're aspiring towards, the more you can occupy a state of being that thing, the more reality really will resonate and return that to you, which is crazy to me. It's crazy to me. I never thought that would actually be a thing. And I catch myself doing it. The more that I'm in this state of presence, because society has convinced us that we need to either occupy the past or occupy the future mentally. And a lot of you are probably familiar with Sigmund Freud. He had a lot of theories based on the idea that we need to look at and focus on our complex trauma through our childhood. And the thing that we don't realize is when we are focusing outside of the present moment, outside of right now and right here, as you're watching this, we actually take ourselves out of that moment entirely and put ourselves back into those memories and circumstances, which there's not necessarily anything wrong or right about that. It just is what it is. And especially if you're trying to alter your state of being and your identity, if you're continuing to reflect and be outside of occupying the identity you want to have, the more difficult it's going to be for your frequency to match the things that you want to attract in out of abundance. And this was this first started when I would be driving to the gym 5 or 6 years ago. And I was always anxious about going in. I thought people would be looking at me, like it was really nerve-wracking. And I actually got into some really powerful biblical videos that were talking about subscribing to Christianity as more of a warrior than someone who, you know, is a sinner and needs Jesus and, you know, is kind of there for the ride. And adopting that mentality of standing up when you fall down, continuing to rise, like fight, just keep fighting, that internal battle in your mind really helped create the friction and the emotional and psychological space I needed for my consciousness to essentially step back from my ego and say, hold on, what's going on here? Like, there's something here that I'm noticing. There's an error in self that I don't like or agree with, and I want to change it. And the more I kind of continued down that path and conquering my victimization thinking, the more I started to adopt the survivor thinking, and which was much more empowering. And then, you know, this led to more YouTube research, and then I was doing a lot of blue-collar work and stuff, so I'd always have my headphones in. I'd always be sitting there listening to YouTube videos or reading the Bible and stuff like that. Just trying to become more spiritual and aware of myself and the things that I needed to change with my life in order to get to where I thought I wanted to be. And the more I could hold that space for myself and practice holding that space, which starts with being aware of whatever the thing is. It's not like I need to practice this many times a day, and if I don't hit this quota, all of a sudden I failed. Like, that's another limiting belief that I feel like we go into, or at least I did, where anytime I fell short of something, I'd beat the crap up out of myself in my head. And start the whole criticisms and whatnot. And part of really expediting that shift in identity for me, I think, was really learning how to hold space for myself. Because at the end of the day, you've always had you. You've always been there for you. And a close friend of mine actually said something really interesting to me the other day, because I've always wanted to be a dad, just because I didn't have a really good relationship with my father growing up, but there were so many things that I wish that I had growing up. And because of my victim mentality, I used to sit there and say like, oh, well, I'm allowed to act this way because of my relationships in the past with my parents, and victim this and victim that, and it was like an excuse. It was just some stupid crutch that I would throw around. And my friend sat me down and was like, don't you realize that you're the person you wish you had when you were a kid now? And it took me a second. I started to think about it, because I've worked really hard on who I want to become and who I want to be for other people. And I'm an incredibly kind, charismatic, compassionate, tenacious person now. And that was the person that I wish I had growing up. And a lot of times we don't realize through the limiting beliefs that we keep that we've actually conditioned ourselves to be the heroes that we wish we had. And once we begin to recognize that, it really helps open up the amount of space that we're holding for ourselves to heal. And again, kind of goes back to being present and being in the moment, because you can reference things in your past, just like how we can reference the things that we want in the future. But if we spend too much time daydreaming in the past or the future, we lose touch of being in the vibration of reality. And that's where you want to be if you really want the change to happen. And there was a gentleman by the name, I think his name was David Adler, who was around the same time as Freud. And this is kind of where his philosophy was when it came to psychology. And he wanted people to truly heal. He wanted people to progress towards a state of being where, so I'll ask you the question, like, are you really healed if you're still on the same medications? Are you really healed if you're still going to therapy for the same problems? Are you really healed if you're experiencing the same things over and over and over and over again? And I think what society tries to do, especially if you're a conspiracy theorist, is they try to keep you in this state of perpetuation, and they want you to repeat these things so that, one, you're much easier to control and influence, and number two, they can profit off of you, because it's a lot easier to make more money off of someone who's buying drugs from you versus buying drugs off the street or paying for a gym membership or doing other productive things to help encourage that health maintenance. And at the end of the day, I will always defer and subscribe to Adler's philosophy of, if you really want to make a shift in identity, it's not so much focusing on the complex trauma you had in the past, it's really looking at the present and understanding that you can make that shift right here and right now. And it's very, very hard to accept, especially if you're in a place of limiting belief. But the more you practice that awareness of acknowledging when you're limiting yourself, of accepting that concept or idea that you have the ability to change right here in this second, at least mentally, so that then as your mental change occurs, you can start to begin to see the physical evidence in reality start to align with that vibrational change. What happens with your brain is the neurological community is now agreeing on the theory that there's no real physical spot in your brain that stores memories. Like, we can't open your brain and be like, yep, that's exactly where that memory is, and that's exactly where that memory is. They theorize that essentially you're pulling that from an ether, another place or conglomeration of some form of energy. And if we understand energy to be comprised of predominantly waves and particles, it should give you the segue in understanding how easy it really is to make that shift of identity psychologically in the moment. Does that make sense? So it's not like you need evidence, because we have been taught at a very early age as children that we need to observe instant evidence, instant gratification, in order to have proof of whatever the result is, when that is incorrect. Because cognitive behavioral thought therapy tells us that we can shift our thoughts and then in turn shift our experiences. So it's not your experiences that dictate your thought, it's your thought that dictates your experience. And when you begin to adopt that philosophy, you can do really crazy shit. Like really crazy shit. Like you don't realize how integrated you are into an energy bandwidth that allows you to really alter reality. And it's not something that's super complex either. I feel like me trying to understand manifestation was an overcomplication. Yeah, overcomplication, is that even a word? I was overcomplicating it to a point where I thought it had to be, again, this big thing or this big series of things in order to actually make something happen, when the whole premise behind it is you don't have to do anything to make something happen. You just need to resonate, which comes from the conscious part of your being. And your consciousness is already there, it's already doing things. There's this understanding of time that we have as time being a linear component. So it's like, I need to do A in order for B to be executed, which then results in C. And that's not how time actually works. We're actually experiencing time all at the same second. Well, I can't even say second, but it's happening intravenously. Every single moment you have in your life, you're actually experiencing it. You're just occupying the awareness of whatever that experience is through being present. I'm trying to figure out how to explain that better, but you think because you're at where you are that your childhood isn't really happening anymore, or your future isn't really happening anymore. But when it comes to the quantum and physics and stuff like that, or time isn't just linear. Like there are things that exceed time, and even Einstein's theory of relativity, we know that time is affected in different ways depending on certain elements influencing it when it comes to light and, you know, vibrations and all this other stuff. So for us to sit here and say time is a concrete thing, it's almost ignorant, because it's not. In the sense of, you really can, so another theory that I have is every permutation of whatever you could possibly think of and imagine in your head that could happen to you in your reality has already been created. It's already there, which is part of deferring to the idea of creation itself. And if you can think of it, if you can't think of it, thought itself is a component of creation. Just your ability to perceive that you can think in and of itself is a facet, is a mechanic of creation, of design. And when you can recognize that it's not just the physical stuff that's like, oh yeah, this is all part of our reality. It's the psychological stuff that's also part of our reality, because we're still governed by those five senses, or those sensory inputs that are again put into our brain, and then our brain makes sense of it. Because another theory that, or expounding off the prior theory I was talking about with the neurology community, is that your brain acts as a conduit for your consciousness. Your brain doesn't produce consciousness. It acts as an intermediary. It acts as a sensory input. So wherever your consciousness is, or whatever it is influencing your brain, much like how you receive light input from your eyes that gets inputted into your brain, and your brain makes sense of images. It does the same thing with your consciousness. So your consciousness is somewhere else. It's not created by your brain. Your brain is the conduit that your consciousness has that allows it to experience reality. And by really breaking down these concepts and adopting them into the idea behind manifestation has helped me so much in really making that shift. And like one thing I wish I could do for people is, again, like speed this process up, get things to work faster for people. But your limiting belief in your pre-existing brainwashing and skepticism is what holds you back from really acknowledging source energy and consciousness. And when you can think of the reality you want to have, it means that in some way, shape, or form it exists out there as a tangible thing that you can then resonate your vibration with and bring it into your reality. So the more that you're resonating, and a lot of people will tell you different ways to do this, but if you can really start to occupy having the thing and being in that experience of the thing, much like how you would in a memory that you had. Like, you think a memory that you had is real only because we denote value to past reference. And we say, okay, well, this thing in the future isn't real because there hasn't been evidence or what we deem to be evidence of it yet. When in actuality, the thing that happened in the past doesn't exist anymore because we can't actually go back there. And yeah, there might be consensus or agreed observation of whatever that thing is, but empirically we really can't observe that thing again in real time. So there's this weird kind of paradoxical shift that occurs when you're using your memory to reference things. But the same thing can happen because you still experience the same physiological responses when you're having those memories. And you can do the same thing if you're thinking about something you want to come to fruition in the future. And for me, it's still really difficult for me to like really get into the experience of having the thing that I want. But the other thing that I noticed is, for example, like finding a wife to have a family with and stuff. I understand when I really sit down and start wanting to experience, and not just out of lack. Like I'm like, oh, I'm lonely, I miss someone, I want someone, it's, you know, this, that, and the other thing. When I really think about the traits and characteristics of someone that I want as like a best friend and a partner, and a, you know, someone who fucking has my back, I begin to ask myself, am I the person that can complement that, can hold themselves accountable to that, can also reciprocate that, can also be, you know, if my expectations for someone are I want the best person that they can be, or at least the best person that they're aspiring to be, am I doing that too? Like, am I also being the best person? Because you can't be lacking something and then want something more than what you're actually ready for. And I think that's a big thing that I've been practicing now, is learning how to be or occupy the state of being so that I can make adjustments to my thinking or behaviors, or so like my discipline. I want someone who's athletic. Like, I want someone who has a very fit physique and takes care of themselves and is, you know, sexy and attractive and, you know, in my eyes is a 10 out of 10 or whatever. And everyone has different preferences of attraction and beauty. Like, I've had friends where I've looked at girls and been like, oh my gosh, she's so beautiful. And my friends are like, are you kidding me? She's got a ridiculously big nose. I like big noses. I don't know what it is about me. And I'm a leg guy. But, you know, everyone's preferences are different. But at the same time, like, I have things that I want. I don't think that necessarily makes me shallow or anyone shallow for wanting certain attributes or physical attributes, because especially as a guy, like, we're very sexually driven based off of that visual acuity and what we find to be appealing, especially as like a creative artist. And that's just something that I notice and that I accept as part of who I am. And at the same time, I'm sure someone like that who's thinking the same stuff that I am is going to want someone who also takes care of themselves, who's also fit to a certain point and shows discipline through their physique and whatnot. And I think part of what's been frustrating me specifically about drawing in a partner is, again, my weight. And like, I'm not a bad looking guy, but at the same time, I know I can do better. And it's been frustrating most for me with myself, not just because I want to draw certain things in. I was just using the wife thing as an example. It's whatever. Whether it's money, career, whatever. But in order to really draw those things in, you need to be living the identity that you want those experiences to resonate with. And my weight, so I started going back to the gym and lifting weights and was like, okay, well, I'm going to dirty bulk. And it was just some stupid excuse for me to try and put on muscle mass really fast, but also eat whatever the fuck I wanted. And I'm, especially the older I'm getting, well, again, is that a limiting belief where we think, oh, the older we get, the harder it is to lose weight? Probably. And with everything that I know now, it really doesn't seem that far out of the realm of limiting beliefs. So like another limiting belief that I've had is I'm never going to get abs. I'm just, whatever physiological genetics and stuff that I have, it's never going to allow me to get abs. That is 100% a limiting belief, and I really need to counter and adjust that, because I want fucking abs. I want to have a defined body. I want to know that if I'm putting in the work, that I'm really seeing it. And you can't even begin to do that if already out of the gate you're telling yourself you're not going to win. It's really that simple. Like, if you're already telling yourself before you even start the race that you can't do it, you can't even run, you're not even going to get there, you're not even going to cross the finish line, you've already lost. And that's where the mental component is 100% of starting the battle. So just a big component of why I really want to just start making videos. And I've got an hour drive back and forth from where I work and shit, so why not start making videos? This way it gives me kind of like this space to also kind of reflect and soundboard and whatnot. And I mean, if someone listens to these videos and hears something that's really beneficial out of them, like, yeah, that's fucking awesome. But that's what I really want to accomplish, is getting myself to a peak point of proficiency, clarity, healing, so that I can really be not only an example to myself, but an example to other people. Because, people that are struggling, especially with the limiting beliefs and stuff like that, they want evidence of things. Like, that's the biggest thing. Like, especially when it comes to faith. Like, faith is a huge component of spirituality. And, like, the biggest thing that I feel like I've struggled with personally, and a lot of people struggle with, is just having evidence that your faith is working. But the irony of faith is it's trusting that there isn't immediate evidence and that there will be evidence. That's what makes it faith, is if you believe in a higher power, trusting that your higher power will carry through, and even though you're not seeing the immediate results, because we're all impatient people, no matter how patient you are, even a fucking Dalai Lama, I still think you've struggled with patience to a degree. Knowing and getting to a point of accepting that delayed gratification is a huge game changer. And for me, even, I like to call them confirmation experiences. So essentially something will happen and you'll be like, oh, that was a weird coincidence, even though I don't believe in coincidences. But like, something will happen and you'll be like, that was a weird coincidence. And then all of a sudden, like, shortly after that, something else will happen that's directly associated with that thing, but completely outside of any kind of contextual element of reality. Like, totally disassociated individuals repeating similar things, or you having similar experiences that, you know, weren't set off from one another, but you'll start seeing these confirmations occur. And when you go back to bringing that awareness to things and being able to step back and observe, all of a sudden you'll see the time between those moments of confirmation starts to shrink more and more and more and more, and they'll happen more and more frequently until they basically fold in on each other and you're in the new reality. So you know, like I said, I have a tendency to forget things, and I think another really big motivator in me wanting to do just this video recently is I have been kind of bummed lately. Like, I've been, you know, in the dating scene and stuff, and dating around, or even with the career change and whatnot. Again, like, I just started tattooing. I just started my apprenticeship back in February, and it's May. That's only like a couple of months, and I'm trying to get clients and stuff like that so that I can essentially move to Buffalo and provide for myself and provide for a family and all these elements. So having a career as a guy definitely puts a whole different weight on being able to maintain like a relationship or attract in people of a certain caliber that you want. And it's been frustrating, again, going back to the patience and having patience, and also having grace with myself, and just being like, you know, taking the moment of like, how do you want to approach how you encourage you? Like, how often do you sit there and actually encourage yourself instead of saying you're not working hard enough, you're not doing enough, you're not being enough, you're never enough, like you're not amounting to something, but you're not reaching that like hypercritical thinking, and instead saying you're doing really fucking good. Like, you got to remember, like, you just started doing this. Like, you're being really awesome. Like, don't get, yeah, like, it's okay to have a down day, or, you know, a day where you're bummed out because you're not seeing the results you want or things like that. But if you were in a situation where you needed your friend or a loved one to pick you up, you know, what would you say? What would you say to someone who was feeling down and who was upset? Like, how, it's so interesting to me how we treat ourselves so bad, but when we see someone else hurting and we're empathetic beings, we'll go above and beyond to essentially make someone else feel better and help heal that person. When a lot of times, I know me particularly, like, I wouldn't even give that to myself. So I guess I just want to end by saying I really love and appreciate me, and I'm here for me, and I am going to be a lot more conscious about moving forward with everything I do, with, you know, the food I'm eating, with the practices that I'm keeping, and the discipline that I'm maintaining. And for anyone who needs it or didn't realize they need it, you're doing really good. You're doing incredible. Like, the fact that you're still moving and grooving, it really just starts with getting back up. Every time you're knocked back down, just get back up. And then you develop that tenacity, and then you continue to create that space for yourself